The air hung thick with salt and rot, the jungle breathing its humid fever across the ridgeline, where Corporal James McKenna lay prone behind his Springfield M103. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the malaria that had ravaged half his company in the 3 weeks since they'd landed on this god-forsaken island. Through his iron sights, he could see the Japanese machine gun nest, 800 yards distant, nestled in the roots of a banyan tree. 800 yards. A distance that separated the possible from the impossible. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked. The bullet sailed wide, disappearing into the green wall of vegetation. Another wasted shot. Another opportunity lost. McKenna cursed under his breath, feeling the weight of inadequacy press against his chest, like the jungle itself, across the Pacific. In workshops and arsenals from Springfield to Rock Island, American ordnance officers faced a crisis they could no longer ignore. The M103 Springfield and the newer M1 Garand, magnificent weapons in their own right, carried a fatal limitation. Beyond 600 yards, accuracy degraded precipitously. Not because the rifles lacked power. The .30-06 cartridge possessed devastating energy at range, but because the human eye, even the trained eye of a marksman, could not reliably acquire man-sized targets through standard iron sights at such distances. The Japanese, entrenched in defensive positions from Guadalcanal to Tarawa, had learned this quickly. They positioned their strongest points just beyond effective American rifle range, forcing infantry assaults into predetermined kill zones. The mathematics were brutal. For every 100 shots fired beyond 700 yards using standard iron sights, fewer than 12 found their mark. American boys were dying not for lack of courage, but for lack of precision. The soldiers who shipped out to the Pacific in 1942 and 1943 carried with them a confidence born of American industrial might. They had been trained on ranges where paper targets stood obediently at prescribed distances, where the geometry of trajectory met the certainty of a controlled environment. They expected war to be a matter of superior firepower, better logistics, more ammunition. What they discovered instead was an enemy who understood concealment, who turned jungle and coral into fortress, who made every yard of advance cost blood. The Japanese soldier did not present himself as a target. He vanished into terrain, emerging only in the heartbeat before firing, then dissolving again into shadow and vegetation. To kill him required not volume of fire, but surgical precision at distances that tested the limits of human vision. The wire loop that would change this equation arrived not through grand innovation, but through necessity refined into elegance. It bore the prosaic designation M1917NE1 Auxiliary Sight. Those soldiers would come to know it simply as the aperture ring. The design emerged from the observations of Major Edward Crossman, a Marine officer and competitive shooter who had spent the years between wars studying the mechanics of long-range marksmanship. Crossman understood what the ordnance tables often missed, that the limitation of rifle accuracy at distance was not primarily ballistic, but optical. The human eye, when forced to align 3 points, rear sight notch, front sight post, and distant target, struggled with the depth of field required. The wire loop solved this through a principle as old as the camera obscura. By placing a small circular aperture close to the shooter's eye, it reduced the light entering the pupil to a focused shaft, dramatically increasing depth of field, and allowing the eye to simultaneously perceive both front sight and target with clarity. The first trials conducted at Camp Perry in the spring of 1943 produced results that stunned even the most optimistic observers. Marksmen using standard iron sights averaged a hit probability of 19% at 800 yards. With the wire loop aperture attached, that same group of shooters achieved hit rates of 50%. A 31% improvement, but the raw numbers told only part of the story. What the aperture ring delivered was not merely mathematical precision, but psychological transformation. For the first time, soldiers could see what they were shooting at. The vague blur of enemy movement beyond 700 yards resolved into targetable form. The impossible became merely difficult. The difficult became routine. On Saipan, in June 1944, Sergeant William Hawkins of the 2nd Marine Division recorded in his field journal an encounter that captured this transformation with stark simplicity. His platoon, pinned down by Japanese fire from a cave complex 900 yards up the ridgeline, had exhausted 2 days and 17 casualties attempting to advance. Hawkins, equipped with an M1903 fitted with the new aperture sight, spent the following morning picking apart the Japanese position, 1 shot, 1 kill, across a distance that would have been prayer work 6 months earlier. By noon, the cave fell silent. "I could see their faces," Hawkins wrote, "not close enough to make out features, but close enough to know they were men and not shadows. The ring makes them real, and real things can be killed." The wire loop became a talisman, passed from soldier to soldier, with the reverence reserved for proven tools of survival. Unlike the complex optics of a telescopic sight, fragile, expensive, requiring constant adjustment and maintenance in tropical conditions, the aperture ring was nearly indestructible, a loop of spring steel, a mounting bracket, nothing that corrosion or moisture or the violence of combat could easily compromise. Men who lost their primary weapons would salvage the aperture ring, transferring it to whatever rifle came to hand. It weighed less than an ounce. It cost approximately 40 cents to manufacture. It saved lives by the hundreds, then by the thousands. The Japanese, meticulous students of American equipment, noted the appearance of the wire loop in captured rifles and intelligence reports. What confounded their analysts was not the device itself. Japanese opticians understood the principle of aperture sights, but the American willingness to distribute such a force multiplier to common infantry. In the Japanese military tradition, precision weapons belonged to specialists, to the elite. The Americans, it seemed, believed every rifleman deserved the tools of a marksman. This was not merely a difference in equipment doctrine, but a philosophical chasm. The wire loop represented something the Japanese war machine could not replicate, the assumption that the individual soldier, properly equipped, could alter the course of battle through personal skill rather than collective sacrifice. By late 1944, production of the M1917A1 aperture sight exceeded 500,000 units annually. Every rifle company shipping to the Pacific Theater carried them in quantity, distributed not to designated marksmen, but to anyone who could demonstrate proficiency. The doctrine shifted accordingly. Squad tactics evolved to incorporate long-range precision fire as a standard element rather than specialist support. Japanese defensive positions that once required artillery or air support to neutralize became vulnerable to well-aimed rifle fire. The calculation of warfare tilted, degree by degree, in favor of the force that could reach out and touch the enemy at distances previously considered beyond infantry capability. The transformation extended beyond tactical advantage into the realm of morale and identity. The American soldier, often derided by German and Japanese propaganda as soft, undisciplined, dependent on material superiority, discovered in the wire loop, a tool that rewarded skill over doctrine, individual excellence over collective obedience. The Japanese banzai charge, that terrifying rush of bodies willing to die for emperor and empire, lost its psychological edge when American riflemen could drop charging soldiers at 800 yards with the same reliability they once managed at 400. The wire loop did not make Americans better soldiers than their enemies. Courage cannot be calibrated. Suffering cannot be quantified. But it gave them the ability to bring their advantages to bear with surgical efficiency. Among the millions of small metal objects that flooded from American factories during the war years, the shell casings and belt buckles, the mess kits and entrenching tools, the wire loop stands as perhaps the most elegant solution to a problem stated simply: how do we help our soldiers see clearly enough to survive? It asked nothing of the shooter, except that he look through it honestly. It promised nothing except clarity. In the moral calculus of war, where every advantage purchased in steel and ingenuity represents lives preserved or lives taken, the aperture sight occupies a strange space. It made killing more efficient, and in making killing more efficient, it saved the lives of those who wielded it. This is the paradox of defensive warfare, that the best way to bring soldiers home is to give them the tools to end the fight quickly, decisively, at maximum range. The wire loop, that simple circle of steel no wider than a quarter, became a window through which a generation of American soldiers glimpsed both the possibility and the burden of precision. It showed them their enemy clearly enough to kill efficiently, but clearly enough also to understand the human cost of each trigger pull. In the end, the 31% improvement in accuracy was not merely a statistical achievement, but a manifestation of democratic principle made tangible, that the common man, properly equipped and properly trained, possesses the capacity for excellence that no ideology of racial superiority or imperial destiny can overcome. The wire loop bent light and physics to human purpose, and in doing so, bent the trajectory of the Pacific War toward a resolution written not in abstract strategic terms, but in the accumulated precision of 10,000 riflemen who could finally see clearly what they were fighting for and what they were fighting against.